Okay, this is going to be part 7 on the Deadly Training Materials series. Okay, as we saw in previous videos, the Government of Canada, they know they've been caught, and they are currently in the process of rewriting the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. And again, one of the key players in that is going to be now Minister of Transportation, Chrystia Freeland, who used to be the Prime Minister of Canada. Many would think that would be a demotion for her to go from Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to Minister of Transportation, but I suspect there's a very good reason that Chrystia Freeland is now as Minister of Transportation. But anyway, there's a new player in all of this by the name of Michael Sabia. Michael Sabia is the new clerk of the Privy Council in Canada. He reports directly to the Prime Minister, and they both basically report into the Privy Council. Canada likes to say, oh, we're an independent monarchy, whatever. We're separate from, we have our own constitution. But the King of England, King Charles, very much still plays a role in the government of Canada. He opened Parliament recently for Mark Carney. But anyways, if you look at Michael Sabia, that was not a name I was particularly familiar with, but one of his roles was he was most recently he used to work for Chrystia Freeland as a deputy, I believe, Minister of Finance. I have that on a further screen, but anyways, he also worked at Hydro-Québec. Hydro-Québec is also one of the 3 scandals that I had raised with the government of Canada impacting U.S. national security. Not one of the bigger ones, but definitely an important one that could put the U.S. hydro grids at risk based on what was going on in the government of Canada and what they were doing. Hydro-Québec is a crown corporation, and so if there's some funny stuff going on there or illegal stuff, well, I like to say it's illegal. The RCMP said that it was not illegal to throw proprietary information and very sensitive information pertaining to hydro facilities just in a local dump, where anybody could pick up manuals tied to Hydro-Québec, emails with user IDs and passwords, and the 800 number for resetting that. I had lists of employee, basically social insurance numbers, their personal addresses, medical records, enough information that I could pretend to be an Hydro-Québec employee, call the 800 number to reset the password. When you have everybody's social insurance numbers, and those are used, first initial, last 6 digits, whatever, to be part of your user ID for proprietary systems. Well, hey, if I got the 800 number to reset that, I have the full SIN number, I have the full address, personal address, I could pretty well, pretend to be one of those employees. But anyways, I worked with a lot of programmers, folks, and I can tell you that the information I had was so sensitive that it could easily have been used, in my opinion, to hack Hydro-Québec systems. And, RCMP in Canada didn't think that was a cause for concern. So I gave that also to the U.S. and said, well, Canada doesn't think this is an issue. I think that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security would beg to disagree, and so I literally had a garbage bag full of information, blueprints, all kinds of stuff for very proprietary facilities. And so, the RCMP tried to say it's not illegal to throw something in the dump. Well, then I guess it's not illegal, I said, for me to make an art collage of this information, right? That's when I think it kind of worried them a bit. But anyways, I received an email from an Hydro-Québec investigator after that saying, I understand that you have some of our proprietary information and I'd like to get it back. Well, I gave enough of it to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security that I think they knew there were issues. And I think the government of Canada knew there were issues, even though they tried to sweep those all under the carpet again. But anyways, that's a separate issue. But the reason I raise it is because Michael Sabia was fairly recently a CEO at Hydro-Québec, which is a crown corporation of the government of Canada. But he had other key roles. He was also part of this Quebec, it's called, I'm sorry, I have to look down here, Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec, or CDPQ. CDPQ is a it's a financial institution which has a lot of ties to PM Carney's investments at Brookfield Asset Management and stuff. And I'm not going to go into all of that. At the end of this series, this particular video, I'm going to give you a website where you can go to look at all this information. There is a guy who has done fantastic work at looking at all the conflicts of interest of Mark Carney. But suffice it to say, the people who are supposed to act as the gatekeepers so that Mark Carney is not involved in conversations he shouldn't be involved in based on all his conflicts of interest. Well, Michael Sabia is one of those gatekeepers, and he's got the same conflicts of interest when it comes to this case populaire, let's see, what's it called? It's called Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec. So CDPQ. That company has ties to Brookfield Asset Management. And so, for us to be told, oh, the clerk of the Privy Council is going to be the gatekeeper and make sure that Mark Carney does everything on the up and up, the conflicts are there for him too, for the clerk of the Privy Council. But the other issue that I wanted to raise here, more specifically as it has to do, this is the part where he comes in, Michael Sabia, the new clerk of the Privy Council, I think he was put there for a very good reason. If you look here on the screen print right above me, that was taken from the Canadian Club, and it's on Michael Sabia, and it states that from 1993 to 1999, Michael Sabia occupied various roles with the Canadian National Railway, including Chief Financial Officer. He spent, he spent the preceding decade working as a senior official of the Government of Canada also. So Mr. Sabia obtained his bachelor's in economics from the University of Toronto, and he also studied at Yale. But anyways, the fact that he was at Transport Canada, at CN Rail from 1993 to 1999, should be a lot of alarm bells, going off for people by this time, because he could have played an absolutely critical role when it comes to rail frontline frontline training programs. And so let's look at that a little more closely. Okay, the reason that I said that, alarm bells should be going off when you see the name Michael Sabia and the fact that he used to be a chief financial officer for CN Rail, and that he was at CN from 1993 to 1999. Huge red flags here, folks, especially when I see that this guy is in this critical role as clerk of the Privy Council of Canada. If you look on the left here, what is provided is page 10 from the death investigation report for conductor trainee Jason Clooney. And if you look where I have the arrows here, it talks about Canadian National Railway conductor trainee program. It says before 1995, it took over 2 years to become a fully qualified conductor at CN. Well, that's because before 1995, CN Rail was a crown corporation of the government of Canada. And in 1995, CN Rail became a publicly traded company. It was no longer a crown corporation of the government of Canada. So Sabia, who during this time between, he had several roles there, one of them being chief financial officer. You think that he might have played a role in all of this? My hunch would be yes. But anyways, so it says here, the training program began with classroom training on rules and instructions to qualify as a brakeman, assistant yard conductor. This component typically took about 3 months to complete. It was followed by 2 years of practical training. Okay, so under Michael Sabia at CN, when he was an executive there, boy, we need a full 2 years to train these people. That was what was required. But as soon as CN becomes a publicly traded company, we only need a few months? Why is that? That's because Canadians who were not in the public sector were so much smarter than those in the public sector? Come on. It had to be all about money, folks. It's always follow the money, honey. We're now a publicly traded company. Our goal is now not employee safety and public safety. Our goal is now maximize shareholder wealth. And I think that explains why that program went from a 2-year program to one of only a few months when Michael Sabia was an executive at CN Rail. So after that, it says, let's see, they would work as a member of a 3-person crew under the guidance of a qualified conductor and locomotive engineer. Okay, it says, during this practical component, the brakeman, assistant yard conductor would normally experience numerous situations that would serve to reinforce safe work practices and the practical application of the Canadian Rail operating rules. On completion of the training, a brakeman/assistant yard conductor was required to pass a rules examination to qualify as a conductor. So, back then, you would take your rules exam at the end of your 2 years. Today, you take it, basically in the first few weeks. Or when you're in your class training and stuff, not after you've had all your practical experience and stuff in the field, which is only a few months. That's when you do your field test. But your rules exam, you take before that. And I can tell you, folks, I seriously question how well rules are actually learned because, in my opinion, they almost get spoon-fed the answers if they miss them. If you don't get that 90% or whatever you need to pass, they go through the questions and I think you get to retest and, maybe you're spoon-fed the information a little more than you should be. Just my opinion. But anyways, so then it says, since 1995, the conductor trainee program at CN has been progressively shortened to the present 17 to 20 week program. It says, however, some trainees receive incentives to train for 6 or 7 days straight during the 45-day trial trip portion of the training, and they may qualify in less than 17 weeks. So we went from a 2-year program to one that could be 17 weeks. But hey, there's no issue there, right? No safety issues whatsoever, right? Anyway, this should be raising a lot of red flags, folks, because Transport Canada did not do its oversight roles. And given that CN Rail was a Crown Corporation of the Government of Canada, as was CP Rail until 1995, and then they both became publicly traded corporations, and the people who were there at CN would then go on to the new publicly traded company, when it was no longer a Crown Corporation. So they just went over from Government of Canada employees to become CN employees, making the big bucks. Now we got to maximize shareholder wealth. So where can we cut? Front line. employee training programs was clearly one of those areas. Okay, so as I've stated several times, I had requested a lot of freedom of information requests in matters pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. And the reason that the name Michael Sabia is even more important now, in my humble opinion, and I think that there's a reason he's actually named Clerk of the Privy Council. If you look here, there was this was done, let's see, if you look right above my head here, you can see that was the original. It's only part of the page. I blanked out some of the stuff at the bottom. I just am showing you the top of the page. But I had requested the CN Rail training program changes for conductor trainees. And I had filed this actually in March if I said, appeal on the 15th of 2019, that means, they had 30 days to give you the information you request when you file one of these things. That means I had filed this, and the date, I have that date. It was in February 15th, 2019 that I would have filed this request. So if you look here where the red arrows are, one of the things I had asked for specifically, okay, because again, the Railway Safety Act necessitates via sections 18 and 19 that any changes to employee training programs must first be filed with Transport Canada for prior review and approval prior to field implementation. The regulation, the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, section 19, says they only need to inform Transport Canada that these program changes have been implemented in the field. But that's a regulation. An act overrides a regulation. And the Railway Safety Act specifically states in sections 18 and 19 that railway employee training programs, changes to those training programs must first be reviewed and approved by the Minister of Transportation in Transport Canada before field implementation. And so one of the things I had requested in this Freedom of Information access request was, please, and this thing was like, I think it was 17 pages long, okay? This request with attachments was 17 pages long, and nothing was ever released by the Government of Canada when I requested this. What I requested, I said, please provide documentation showing these changes made in 1995 in 1995 were properly filed with Transport Canada. So when CN Rail went from a Crown Corporation of the Government of Canada to a publicly traded corporation, and when they made all those changes, taking it from a 2-year program to one that could be as short as 17 weeks, by law, according to the Railway Safety Act of 1987, they should have filed all of those program changes with Transport Canada for prior review and approval prior to field implementation. So what I wanted to know here was that done in 1995? So CN Rail and Government of Canada, please prove to me that this was done, okay? Because I kind of suspect it was not. But anyway, so that was what I requested, and I'm telling them here, per the Railway Safety Act, sections 18 and 19, and then show who approved this new training program on behalf of Transport Canada in 1995. And I stated, please provide all documentation pertaining to this new training program and its approval back in 1995. If the Governor and Council approve these changes to rail worker training programs at CN in 1995, then provide the name of the Governor and Council who approved these changes and the position or title held by that Governor and Council. The Governor and Council is actually a group of people, it looks like, and usually the Minister of Transportation is part of that group. So if you're a CN Rail executive, did you file as Michael Sabia? He went over to CN after a guy by the name of Paul Tellier, who was first the clerk of the Privy Council way back, and he became, I think, the first CEO of CN Rail when it became a publicly traded company, and he's the one who convinced Michael Sabia to come on over to CN Rail as a publicly traded company and to leave the government of Canada as an employee of the government of Canada. And so that's how Sabia went over to CN. So I'm asking here, was he an executive for the Crown Corporation? Who is the person who approved the changes at Transport Canada? Okay, and I'm basically asking him because on pages 11 and 12 of Jason's accident report, they also list a bunch of changes that happened, you know, to frontline training programs for conductor trainees. And so I wanted to know, okay, prove to me that those changes also, in addition to the 1995 changes, did all these changes that happened over time when CN Rail was now a publicly traded company, changes that happened in the field when conductor trainee Jason Clooney was also a conductor trainee at CN Rail. Were all the changes listed in his death investigation report by the Transportation Safety Board? Were those all approved by Transport Canada in accordance with the Railway Safety Act? If not, why not? So I'm asking the Government of Canada in this freedom or access to information request, give me all the proof that you guys went through the proper procedures and that your executives at CN Rail weren't violating the Railway Safety Act and that Transport Canada wasn't violating the Railway Safety Act back in 1995, as well as later on when all these changes, these other changes were made at CN Rail, changes that are listed in Jason's accident report. Okay, so that's the issue. And so the fact that Michael Sabia, a former CN Rail executive, when CN was both a Crown Corporation and when it became a publicly traded company, the fact that this guy, who may have played a role back then, is now clerk of the Privy Council, when the Ministry of Transportation is now all of a sudden going to overhaul the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation when you haven't done so in 38 years? And the only reason, in my opinion, you're doing so is because of the massive liabilities the Government of Canada can now be facing, not just in Canada, but in the US, because the corrupt Government of Canada allowed so many of these executives who were part of so many violations of the law to escape to become key executives in the US rail industry. And so now this is affecting frontline rail workers potentially in the US. There's some serious issues and questions that need to be answered here, folks. And so when I see Michael Sabia and what his previous roles were, and he's now clerk of the Privy Council, I've got serious concerns with that. And for even better reason, when you see some of the other information that I'm going to be showing you here as this video continues. Okay, so when I was fighting to get this information pertaining to changes to conductor trainee training programs at CN Rail, you know, I had so many emails with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. But in one of these emails, you can see here, this one is dated April 9th of 2019. I basically am discussing this particular request that I had made, and I was also that I had filed. I'm attaching a copy of what I had sent them on February 15th, 2019. So again, that confirms the date that I had sent that to them. And when I would send stuff, I always sent it via trackable mail. So, you know, they can't say they didn't get it. Because it was pretty well usually signature required and at the other end. But you can see here in the email that I'm telling this person at the Office of the Information Commissioner, Transport Canada never gives me a file number anymore, basically, so I do not have one for you. It was as if they were trying to pretend that they did not even receive my requests. They would stop sending me that letter you're supposed to send to acknowledge that your request has been received, and we'll let you know when we have the information for you. They wouldn't even do that anymore for this particular request. So, geez, all this stuff that Chrystia Freeland is now trying to do to overhaul these conductor training programs, a lot of it, when I'm reading it, has to do with the information that I submitted to Transport Canada and the Government of Canada as serious problems that I had documented. And so, like I said, I've been doing Transport Canada's job literally for almost 10 years, as I would send them all these emails on problem after problem and violation of law after violation of law that I had uncovered. And so, what are we going to do? Well, the law, the 10 D's of law. That's one of the videos I'd previously done. Deny, deflect, delay, deceive, pretend we didn't receive anything, right? Let me tell you, the Government of Canada is very good at practicing those 10 D's of law. But it's like I told them, that last one, deal, that will not happen with me. There's no way that you're going to get any type of a deal with me behind the scenes to try and sweep all this under the carpet. So the fact is, though, folks, I fought for years to get this information, and it was never provided to me, and I suspect that's because it did not exist. And if you recall, in a previous video, we saw how, information that was provided to me via access to information requests showed that, CN had not updated its training programs significantly since the original filings, and the document was dated 2004. So, all of those changes that are in Jason's accident report from pages 11 and 12, I suspect those were all violations of the Railway Safety Act by Transport Canada, the Government of Canada, the rail carrier. So, huge issues, folks, and I very much suspect that there have been violations of the Railway Safety Act back in 1995, when Michael Sabia might have been at CN Rail or might have been part of this entire process. Not just saying, I've got some huge issues with this guy now being clerk of the Privy Council, because that is a huge, huge role in Canada, and you'll see why in a few minutes. Okay, now on this particular slide, I put the 10 D's of law here. Well, it's the 10 D's of responding to an opponent's argument, not specifically the 10 D's of law, but I call them the 10 D's of law. But here they are. Deflect, delay, deny, discount, deceive, divide. Dulcify means to appease. You give them a little bit of a little something, and they're going to think that they're going to get more, and that we're making progress, right? It's a way to appease someone, appease your opponent. Discredit, destroy. Oh yeah, we could talk about that one too when it comes to another scandal with the Government of Canada and what they've been hiding, a much, much bigger one, where they attempted to do this to my family, in my humble opinion. Didn't work though. And then the last one, deal. So keep in mind the 10 D's of law as you go through all these materials pertaining to what's going on in the rail industry in Canada. And again, this is filtering into the U.S. because it now impacts the U.S., right? Because of the key players that were allowed to escape to the U.S. Anyway, this particular letter, I don't think had to do with the request pertaining to the request for changes made to conductor trainee training programs, the Freedom of Information request for that one, because they never acknowledged that one. They just tried to pretend it didn't even exist, okay? But it most certainly did. But just to give you an idea of some of the stuff I would get on some of my other requests, on this one, you can see here, it says your request was placed on hold twice for unspecified reasons. So that's the type of stuff I would have to deal with. They wouldn't tell me at all what they were doing, and then I'd have to appeal. After an amount of time, I would appeal and say, where's my information that you were supposed to disclose? And when the Office of the Information Commissioner would look into it, they'd find out something like this: my request has been placed on hold for an unspecified reason. And I would have been told absolutely nothing as to why that was done. No acknowledgement of nothing. It just gets done, and too bad for you, too bad, so sad. We'll just let you try and fight us. You're just a private citizen. You're not a law firm, whatever. We'll just fight you as long as we can, right? That was basically the attitude. So when they looked into this particular one, they said, we will record your complaint as well-founded. So, when the Office of the Information Commissioner, delay, all these delay tactics, right? When you have a civil lawsuit, okay, you only have 2 years usually to file your lawsuit once you become aware of a tort, like a problem, right? You only have 2 years to sue the opposition. In matters that are criminal, however, you have a lot longer. Death cover-ups, conspiracy to hide crimes, those types of violations. I think the statute of limitations a lot longer. But anyways, here's the thing. To this day, Transport Canada and the Government of Canada has refused to release the information I requested pertaining to changes to conductor training programs. What are you hiding? Right? Well, let me tell you something. Everybody needs to be aware of the fact that when the other side is hiding something, that stops the clock for the statutes of limitations. So, if they don't come to the table with clean hands, you stop the clock. If the other side is hiding something, it stops the clock for statutes of limitations. But again, the statute of limitations for criminal offenses are much, much, much bigger. And, where's the RCMP in all of this? They've, our new RCMP commissioner, Michael Duhaime, in Canada, has known about these issues, pretty well since day one, since he took office. But again, the commissioner of the RCMP is appointed by the Prime Minister, and he serves at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. And so do all the key other roles in the RCMP, the high-level roles, deputy commissioners and I think directors and stuff. They are appointed by the Office of the Prime Minister, and they serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. So are they going to go after their boss? I don't know. Well, you know what? If they don't do their job in these matters, then the RCMP, can be sued for breach of public trust, because this affects public safety. It affects the financial markets, because it's financial fraud. When a company pretends to be so much better than it is with its training programs, if investors in the rail industry knew of all these violations of the law, do you think they'd be investing potentially millions in a company like CN Rail? Or would they be investing potentially millions in instruments put out there by the Government of Canada? Oh, I don't think so. When people start realizing how massive the liabilities can be, that affects investment decisions. And so, Mr. RCMP Commissioner Michael Duhaime, where is your investigation into all these issues? Are you going after Trudeau? Are you going after Minister of Transportation Freeland, who's hidden this? Or other ministers of transportation? They've all remained silent. Jagmeet Singh, who was the leader of the opposition for years, he was the leader of the New Democratic Party, the NDP in Canada, propping up the Trudeau administration for years, in spite of knowing of all these issues. I'm sorry, but in my opinion, they all belong in jail. That's my opinion. You can form your own opinion. Yeah, now we're going to overhaul, the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. Well, you better be able to prove that you have had an ongoing RCMP investigation dating back to potentially 2018, Ms. Freeland, because that's when I started blowing the whistle on death cover-ups. I had already started blowing the whistle on fake qualifications in 2016. So where was your investigation? What did you do to investigate these issues? And are you thinking now that, oh, this wasn't all disclosed to the public? Because I've held back until the proper time. And the proper time, I've got to tell you, has been with the new Trump administration. Because, in my opinion, that administration is a lot more honest and transparent than any has ever been. And J.D. Vance, well, the East Palestine, Ohio derailment, that was on his home turf. And so his constituents received some of this information from me, you know. And so I just think that there's a reason Chrystia Freeland is Minister of Transportation now, and perhaps that Michael Sabia is Clerk of the Privy Council. And I'll tell you a little more about that one, again, as we move forward in this video. Okay, so if Michael Sabia is now the new clerk of the Privy Council, and he used to work at CN Rail from 1993 to 1999, which would have included that 1995 period when CN Rail went from a Crown corporation to a privately traded company, in my opinion, Michael Sabia, the new clerk of the Privy Council, given, in my opinion, what could be very serious conflicts of interest, needs to recuse himself from any and all conversation tied to the overhaul of SOR 87-150, the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. The thing is, folks, the Transportation Safety Board reports directly into the Privy Council. So, you know, the minister for the Transportation Safety Board is the president of the Privy Council. And the clerk is, you know, about the second highest position in there as far as the Privy Council. You know, well, yeah, the Prime Minister's in there too, but if you're the clerk of the Privy Council, that's a very high level position in the Privy Council and in the government of Canada. And so, you know, if you've got these massive conflicts of interest, you need to recuse yourself from any conversations tied to, you know, potential violations of the law by CN Rail or Transport Canada or the Government of Canada during this period from 1993 to 1999 and further on when other changes were made at CN Rail. Clearly, Michael Sabia has very strong past ties to CN Rail. And so if CN Rail has been violating the law potentially as far back as 1990, in the 1990s, and to this day, I would argue, in my opinion, you know, should this person not be recusing himself? I think there's a very good reason that Mark Carney tried to slip Michael Sabia in there as clerk of the Privy Council. And I don't think it's all tied just to the fact that they're buddies when it comes to some of these Brookfield asset management issues. You know, when I see Chrystia Freeland as Minister of Transportation now, when she used to be Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and the Minister of Finance of Canada, and she's basically, you know, the person who brought down the Trudeau administration because of her horrible budget that they knew would not pass. And so if there's a motion of non-confidence, the government falls in Canada and there has to be an election. So, you know, Michael Sabia, in my opinion, should not be clerk of the Privy Council if he's going to be, you know, in any way tied to any investigation into any of these issues pertaining to railway employee training programs or violations of the law by Transport Canada or the Transportation Safety Board, which reports directly into the Privy Council. And when you've got, a garbage investigation and garbage death investigation report, as was done clearly by the Transportation Safety Board in matters pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, all those videos I did on the report called R13W0260, all the brainwashing, all the lies, the deceptions in that report, what I call the visual, which is all marked up in red, the Transportation Safety Board. Well, when the Transportation Safety Board reports in directly to the Privy Council, there's an issue with all of this. Okay, so Michael Sabia, the new clerk of the Privy Council, given in my opinion his very serious conflicts of interest, needs to recuse himself from any and all conversations tied to the overhaul of SOR 87-150, the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, any and all conversations pertaining to railway investigation reports by the Transportation Safety Board, which reports directly to the Privy Council, where those investigations have anything to do with either CN Rail, where Sabia was a key executive, or CPKC Rail, where many former CN Rail executives or employees now work, or Via Rail, which hires its locomotive engineers, conductors, etc. from CN and or CP Rail, making fake qualifications and or death cover-ups also an issue for Via Rail, a passenger rail line. So, he needs to recuse himself from anything, in my opinion, tied to the Transportation Safety Board. Conflicts of interest are just too massive there, and any investigation at all by that board, and any investigation tied to violations of laws, anything that has to do with the Minister of Justice, if it has to do with conversations tied to violations and, prearranged, prefixed, or determined occupational health and safety tribunal hearing decisions, as was 2016 OH, occupational health, OHSTC 20, decision number 20 that year was tied to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. So all of these things, the clerk of the Privy Council, in my opinion, needs to recuse himself from any of these conversations. If it is tied to anything having to do with the rail industry, Michael Sabia should recuse himself and not be allowed to participate in any of these discussions, changes to laws, etc. To now Minister of Transportation and former Deputy Prime Minister and former Minister of Finance of Canada, Chrystia Freeland. Again, where's your criminal investigation into all of these issues of fake qualifications and or death cover-ups allowed and promoted by the government of Canada, which chose to become a rail partner in crime rather than a regulator? And in the process, as you allowed so many to escape prosecution by becoming key rail executives in U.S. Class 1 rail carriers. Where's the criminal investigation into all of these issues, given you, Minister of Transportation Freeland, have known of these issues for quite some time, and given all the financial fraud implications in all of this too? These are very serious issues. In my opinion, Minister Freeland should probably also recuse herself in these discussions. I don't think that she's the right person to have as Minister of Transportation overhauling the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation when she was the previous Minister of Finance of Canada. And we're talking massive financial fraud, not just in this scandal, but in others that she's been hiding from the people of Canada. So huge issues. I've got huge issues with the people who are under Mark Carney. And Mark Carney was a financial advisor, economic advisor to Prime Minister Trudeau. So Mark Carney should be recusing himself from these discussions. He also worked with Freeland and Trudeau for years. So you're going to tell me that he didn't know about some of these issues? I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. So, in my opinion, these people need to recuse themselves from all of this. There's a lot of people, you know, and same thing with um, anyone who was a former, any of them who were on my distribution list. You know, you've got people that, like, for example, now Minister of Foreign Affairs, Anita Anand. Well, she used to be the Minister of Transportation. So you didn't disclose any of this to the public. And why should you be, Minister of Foreign Affairs dealing with the U.S. when you've been hiding so much also from the people of Canada? In my opinion, none of these people should be involved in anything that has to do with the rail industry, be it in Canada or the U.S. Um, they just should not be in these discussions. That's just my humble opinion. Okay, this is where I'm going to end part 7 of deadly training materials. And again, like, share, subscribe. Make sure you stay subscribed. You can see that as we get more and more into these issues, they just get nastier and nastier. I told you, you're not going to be bored on this website or on this channel. And so also, if you can help, donate to my work, go to my website, railfamiliesunited.com. You can either donate to me to help support my work. You can donate to the family of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, his parents, because, I literally dragged that couple through a living nightmare for years. And they're elderly. And when you lose a son, that's one less child there to help you when you are elderly. So if you can do anything to help Jason's family, his parents, please do so. And the other thing is, if you can't donate financially, anybody can do something to help. Get the word out. Go to my website, and under that donate tab, you will find that I did this one-page snippet thing that you can just print off any printer, cut out these things that look like a business card, just print them, cut them, and hand them out to get the word out to people. There's something everybody can do. So do something. Don't stick your head in the sand. Do something to change this situation. And on that, I will see you on the next video, part 8. So have a good day.